Please subscribe to our channel for more stories. My name is Sarah, and I'm 8 years old. What I'm about to tell you is something I've never shared with anyone before. Not even my best friend Emma. I need to tell this story before it's too late, before the memories fade and the truth gets buried forever. That cold Tuesday morning in October changed everything I thought I knew about life, about family, and about what it means to be brave when you're just a little girl standing in a room full of adults who think they know better than you. I remember waking up that morning with butterflies in my stomach, not the good kind you get on Christmas morning, but the scary kind that make you feel like something terrible is about to happen. Mom had been crying again the night before, and I pretended to be asleep when she came to check on me, her face red and puffy from tears she thought I couldn't see. Everyone thought our family was perfect from the outside. Dad with his fancy job, Mom with her beautiful smile, and me with my straight A's and perfect attendance. But the truth was so much darker than anyone could imagine. The courthouse looked like a giant monster made of gray stone and cold windows, and as we walked up those endless steps, I felt smaller and smaller with each one. Mom's hand was shaking in mine, and I could feel her wedding ring trembling against my palm. She kept whispering that everything would be okay, but her voice cracked on every word, and I knew she was lying to both of us. Dad walked ahead of us, his shoulders straight and confident like always, but something was different about him that day. Something that made my skin crawl and my heart race with fear I couldn't name yet. Inside, the hallway echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations, and I noticed how people stared at us as we passed. Some looked curious, others looked sorry for us, but most looked away quickly when they caught my eye. That's when I realized this wasn't just another adult problem that would sort itself out while I played in my room. This was something big, something that would change everything. And somehow I was right in the middle of it. Mom kept checking her watch and smoothing down my hair, her nervous energy making me even more anxious. Every few minutes, she would bend down and whisper reminders about being good, about staying quiet, about letting the grown-ups handle everything. But her words felt wrong somehow, like she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. Dad's lawyer arrived like a storm cloud in an expensive suit, all sharp angles and cold smiles. He barely looked at me, treating me like a piece of furniture that happened to be in his way. When he spoke to Mom, his voice had a tone that made her shrink into herself, and I watched my brave, beautiful mother become smaller and more scared. With every word he said, that's when I started to understand that we weren't here because something good was going to happen. We were here because something terrible had already happened, and now a room full of strangers was going to decide what happened to us next. But what I discovered in that courtroom would shatter everything I believed about the people who were supposed to protect me, and change the course of our lives forever. The courtroom was nothing like the ones on TV shows. It was bigger, scarier, and filled with an energy that made my chest feel tight. The judge sat behind a desk so high that I had to crane my neck just to see his face. And when he looked down at me, his eyes seemed to see right through to my soul. Mom sat in the front row, her purse clutched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white, and every few seconds she would glance at me with eyes that begged me to understand something I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. The wood paneling on the walls seemed to absorb sound, making everything feel muffled and distant except for the beating of my own heart. I counted the windows, 6 tall ones, with thick glass that made the outside world look wavy and unreal. Above us, fluorescent lights hummed with a sound that reminded me of angry bees, and I wondered if this was what it felt like to be trapped in a hive. Dad's lawyer was a tall man with silver hair who spoke in a voice that reminded me of syrup, smooth and sweet on the surface, but somehow wrong underneath. He kept talking about misunderstandings and family dynamics and how children sometimes imagine things that aren't real. Each word felt like a small slap across my face, and I watched Mom shrink smaller and smaller in her seat as he painted a picture of our life that was so far from the truth it made me feel sick. But what happened next would prove that sometimes the smallest voice in the room can carry the most power, and that truth has a way of fighting its way to the surface. No matter how hard people try to bury it. That's when the judge asked the question that changed everything. Does the child wish to speak? The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Everyone in the room turned to look at me. Lawyers, court reporters, people I didn't know sitting in the back rows. Mom's face went completely white, and she shook her head slightly, trying to tell me to stay quiet without words. Dad leaned forward with that smile he used when he wanted something from me, the same smile that had fooled everyone for so long. But I had been quiet for too long. Already, I had been quiet when I heard Mom crying behind the bathroom door. I had been quiet when I saw the bruises she tried to hide with makeup. I had been quiet when Dad's voice got scary late at night and the walls seemed to shake with his anger. And now, sitting in this room full of adults who thought they knew our story, I realized that my quiet had become a cage that was suffocating all three of us. My hands were trembling as I gripped the edge of my chair, and I could feel sweat making my palms slippery. The dress Mom had picked out for me, the blue one with tiny flowers that she said made me look like an angel, suddenly felt too tight around my chest. I thought about all the times I had wanted to tell someone the truth about our family, all the moments when I had almost spoken up but lost my courage at the last second. What I said next would either set us free or destroy us completely, and I was just 8 years old trying to find the words to save my mother's life. I stood up on shaky legs, my voice barely a whisper when I said, "Yes, Your Honor, I want to speak." The words felt strange in my mouth, formal and grown up in a way that didn't match my small body or my princess dress that Mom had picked out special for today. The judge nodded and gestured for me to come forward, and suddenly the distance between my seat and his bench felt like walking across an ocean during a storm. Every step echoed in the silent courtroom, and I could feel dozens of eyes following my movement. My shoes, the black ones with the tiny bow that I usually loved, felt heavy and foreign on my feet. The carpet under my steps was dark blue with a pattern that looked like waves, and I focused on following those waves toward the front of the room where my destiny was waiting. When I reached the witness stand, the bailiff had to adjust the microphone down to my height, and the sound it made as it squeaked and settled seemed to announce to everyone just how small and out of place I was in this world of adult problems and legal consequences. The chair was too big for me, making me feel like a doll sitting in furniture made for giants. Mom was crying now. Not the quiet tears she tried to hide at home, but real, open sobs that made her whole body shake. I wanted to run to her, to tell her it would be okay, to make everything go back to the way it was before I understood what the bruises meant and why she jumped whenever Dad raised his voice. But I couldn't move backward anymore. I had crossed a line by standing up, by choosing to speak, and now there was only one direction left to go. The judge looked down at me with kind eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was gentler than I expected. "Take your time, sweetheart. Just tell us what you want us to know." And that's when I realized the weight of what I was about to do. I wasn't just telling my story, I was telling our story. Mom's and mine. The one we had kept secret for so long that it had started to feel like a terrible dream we couldn't wake up from. I looked out at the courtroom and saw faces waiting. Some patient, some skeptical, all of them focused on this little girl who was about to either tell the truth or fall apart completely. My hands were sweating as I gripped the edge of the witness stand, and I could feel my heart beating so fast it seemed like everyone must be able to hear it. The microphone in front of me looked like a metal flower, and I wondered if my words would sound different coming through it. More important somehow. Dad was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not angry, not disappointed, but something much more dangerous, something that looked like a warning mixed with fear, like he was realizing for the first time that his little princess might not stay quiet forever. His lawyer was shuffling papers and whispering urgently in his ear, but Dad wasn't listening. All of his attention was focused on me, and I could feel the weight of his expectations pressing down on my shoulders. But what came out of my mouth next was going to shatter those expectations and change everything he thought he knew about his obedient little daughter. "My mom didn't do anything wrong," I began, my voice stronger than I expected it to be. "She's not crazy like Dad's lawyer said. She's not making things up or being dramatic or any of those words I heard you all using about her." I paused, watching as several adults in the room shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The court reporter's fingers were flying across her keyboard, capturing every word I spoke, and I realized that my voice was becoming part of an official record that people might read for years to come. Mom tried to protect me, and that's why we're here today. Because she finally got brave enough to tell someone what really happens in our house when the curtains are closed and the neighbors can't see. I could hear my own voice getting steadier with each sentence, like I was finding strength I didn't know I had hidden somewhere deep inside my chest. The prosecutor, a woman with kind eyes who had talked to me earlier, nodded encouragingly. She had told me that my job was just to tell the truth, that I didn't need to worry about anything else. But Dad's lawyer looked like he was about to object, his mouth opening to interrupt my words, before they could do any more damage to his carefully constructed story. That's when I realized that this wasn't just about truth. This was about whose version of truth the judge would believe. And I was the only person in the room who knew what really happened behind our perfect family facade. The weight of that responsibility should have scared me, but instead it made me feel powerful, in a way I had never experienced before. "You want to know about the night Mom called the police?" I continued, my voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "I'll tell you exactly what happened. But first, you need to understand something about my dad that nobody else knows." The courtroom went completely silent, and I could see Dad's face turning red, his hands clenching into fists the way they did right before the yelling started. I had seen those hands hit things before: walls, tables, sometimes Mom when he thought I wasn't looking. They were big hands, with thick fingers and calluses from his weekend projects, hands that should have been for hugging and protecting but had become weapons in our house. Now those hands were pressed flat against the table in front of him, and I could see his knuckles turning white with the effort of keeping them still. "My dad has two faces," I said, the words tumbling out of me like water through a broken dam. "There's the face he shows to his friends at work, to our neighbors, to my teachers at school. That face smiles and laughs and brings me presents and tells everyone what a perfect family we are. But then there's the other face, the one that only Mom and I ever see. The one that comes out when he thinks nobody else is watching or listening or caring about what happens to us." I could see the judge leaning forward slightly, his attention completely focused on my words. In the gallery behind me, I heard someone gasp softly, and I knew without looking that it was probably Mrs. Henderson from next door, who always complimented Dad on his beautiful lawn and his well-behaved daughter. "The night Mom called the police, I was supposed to be asleep," I continued, my hands now steady on the witness stand railing. "But I heard the yelling start downstairs, and it was different from the usual yelling, louder, scarier. I crept to the top of the stairs and looked down through the wooden railings, and I saw Mom on the kitchen floor, and there was blood on her lip, and Dad was standing over her with his hand raised, like he was going to hit her again. The memory was so clear in my mind it felt like I was watching a movie, except this movie was real, and it was my life, and my mom was the one getting hurt. I remembered how the kitchen light had made everything look yellow and sick, how Mom's hair was messy and spread across the tile floor, how Dad's shadow looked like a monster on the wall behind him. "I wanted to run downstairs and help her," I said, my voice getting quieter as the shame of that night came flooding back. "But I was too scared. I was just a little girl, and he was so big and so angry, and I thought if I went down there, he might hurt me too. And then there would be nobody left to help Mom later." The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming in the walls. Mom had stopped crying and was just staring at me with a mixture of love and terror, like she was proud of me for speaking but terrified of what the consequences might be. Dad's lawyer was scribbling notes frantically, probably trying to figure out how to make an 8-year-old girl look like a liar in front of a judge who was starting to see through their carefully crafted story. I ran back to my room and hid under my covers, but I could still hear everything. I whispered, my voice getting quieter as the memories became more vivid. Dad was saying terrible things to Mom, things about how nobody would believe her if she told anyone, how she was stupid and worthless and lucky that he even stayed with someone like her. He said that if she ever tried to leave or tell anyone what really happened in our house, he would make sure she lost me forever. Those words had haunted my dreams for weeks after that night. The idea that Dad could somehow take me away from Mom, that he had that kind of power over our lives, had made me feel sick every time I thought about it. I had started having nightmares about being separated from Mom, about living in a house where nobody would believe me if I tried to tell them the truth about Dad. That's when I heard the crash. I continued, my voice getting stronger again, as I remembered how scared I had been that night. Something glass breaking, and then Mom screaming, not angry screaming, but hurt screaming, the kind that makes your blood feel cold. I wanted to run downstairs and help her, but I was too scared, and I hated myself for being such a coward. The judge's expression had changed completely now. The professional distance he had maintained was melting away, replaced by something that looked like anger mixed with deep sadness. I realized that my words weren't just telling a story anymore. They were revealing a truth that was probably more common than anyone wanted to admit. A truth about what happened behind closed doors in houses that looked perfect from the outside. So, I did the only thing I could think of, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. I grabbed Mom's phone from her bedside table and called 911. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely press the numbers, and when the operator answered, I whispered that my dad was hurting my mom and we needed help right away. I remembered that phone call like it had happened yesterday. The operator had been so kind, asking me questions in a gentle voice while I hid in my closet. Afraid that Dad would hear me talking, she had asked for my address, for my name, for details about what was happening, and I had answered as quietly as I could while my heart pounded so loud I was sure it would give me away. The operator stayed on the phone with me until the police came, I continued, looking directly at the judge. She told me I was being very brave, that I had done exactly the right thing by calling for help, but when I heard the sirens outside, I got scared again, because I knew Dad would be angry that someone had called the police on him. Dad's face had gone from red to completely white, and his lawyer was whispering something urgent in his ear, but Dad wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time, not as his little princess who was supposed to keep family secrets and smile pretty for the neighbors, but as a person with my own voice and my own power to tell the truth. When the police came, Dad completely changed, I said, my voice now carrying a strength I didn't know I possessed. It was like watching someone flip a switch. Asterisk, asterisk, suddenly he was the concerned husband, asking what was wrong, why the officers were there, if there had been some kind of misunderstanding. I continued, watching as several people in the courtroom shook their heads in recognition. He put his arm around Mom's shoulders, and she flinched, but he just smiled and said she had been having a hard time lately, maybe too much stress from her job. I looked directly at Dad as I spoke these words, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Not anger, not disappointment, not the cold control he usually wore like armor, actual fear. He was realizing that his perfect plan was falling apart, piece by piece, told by the one person he never expected to speak up against him. But I saw Mom's face when he touched her. I continued, my hands gripping the rail of the witness stand. She looked like a trapped animal, like she wanted to run but didn't know how. Her lip was swollen, and she had a bruise starting to form on her cheek. But when the police asked her what happened, she just stood there, scared and silent. The prosecutor was nodding slightly, and I could see several people in the gallery, dabbing at their eyes with tissues, but I also noticed Dad's lawyer frantically writing notes, probably preparing to argue that I was just a confused child with an overactive imagination. That's when I realized I needed to tell them about the evidence, about the things I had seen and remembered that proved this wasn't just a story I was making up. That's when I knew I had to speak up, because Mom was too afraid to save herself, I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. And that's when I did something I had never done before. I walked down the stairs in my pajamas, right into the middle of all those adults, the police officers, Dad, Mom, and I told them exactly what I had seen. I said, remembering how small I had felt standing in that kitchen, surrounded by who all turned to stare at me. I told them that Dad had hit Mom, that she was bleeding, that I had heard him say terrible things to her. The memory of that moment was crystal clear in my mind. I could still see the surprised faces of the police officers, the way Dad's fake smile had slipped for just a second before he put it back in place, the way Mom had looked at me with eyes full of love and terror mixed together. Dad tried to say I was confused, that I had probably had a bad dream and was mixing up reality with nightmares. I continued, my voice getting steadier with each revelation. He laughed and told the officers that children have such active imaginations, that I was probably scared by all the commotion and making up stories to try to make sense of what I didn't understand. But I had looked right at those police officers and told them that I wasn't confused, that I knew the difference between dreams and real life, and that what I had seen was Dad hurting Mom. One of the officers, a woman with kind eyes, had knelt down to my level and asked me to tell her exactly what had happened, and I had repeated everything I had seen and heard. That's when Mom finally found her voice, I said, looking over at her with love and pride. She looked at those officers and said, my daughter is telling the truth. Everything she said is exactly what happened. After that night, everything changed between Mom and me, I said, my voice filled with a quiet strength that surprised even me. We weren't just mother and daughter anymore. We were teammates, partners, in trying to figure out how to be safe in our own house. Mom started writing down dates and times when Dad hurt her, and she began taking pictures of her bruises with her phone. I looked over at Mom, and she was smiling through her tears now, a real smile that I hadn't seen in months. It was the smile she used to have when she would read me bedtime stories or help me with my homework. Before Dad's anger took over our house and made everything feel dark and dangerous, but I was doing something too, something Mom didn't know about at first. I continued, feeling like I was revealing the biggest secret I had ever kept. I have my mom's old phone, the one she gave me to play games on when she got her new one. Except I didn't just play games on it. Whenever Dad hurt Mom and she had to cover up the bruises with makeup, I would wait until she was asleep and take pictures. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the entire courthouse had stopped breathing. Dad's lawyer dropped his pen, and I heard it clatter on the floor in the absolute quiet. Mom's eyes went wide with shock. She had no idea what I was about to reveal. Even the judge seemed surprised, leaning forward with intense interest as I prepared to share the secret I had kept hidden for months. I took pictures of her face, her arms, anywhere I could see marks. I said, my voice steady, despite the earthquake of emotions happening inside me. I knew someday someone would need to see the proof. I hid the phone in my dollhouse, in the little attic part where nobody ever looks. I continued, watching as the adults in the room struggled to process what an 8-year-old girl had been planning and documenting. I have 17 pictures, and some of them have dates on them because I learned how to use the camera settings. I wanted to show them to someone, but Mom made me promise never to tell anyone about the things that happened in our house. Dad was standing up now, his face twisted with an anger I had never seen before, but his lawyer grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. I could see them whispering harshly to each other, but I couldn't hear the words. All I could focus on was the truth pouring out of me after being locked inside for so long. I knew it was wrong to break a promise to Mom. I said, my voice carrying the weight of months of fear and planning. But I also knew it was wrong to let someone keep hurting her when I had proof that it was really happening. So every time Dad said Mom was crazy or making things up, I would think about those pictures hidden in my dollhouse, and I would know that someday the truth would come out. The judge was looking at the lawyers now, and I could see something important passing between them in that silent adult language I was still learning to read. This wasn't just a he said she said situation anymore. This was evidence, real proof that an 8-year-old girl had been so scared for her mother's safety that she had documented abuse, with the careful planning of someone much older. But promises don't matter when someone you love is getting hurt, I said, my voice cracking slightly with emotion. And I love my mom more than I was scared of breaking a promise. The worst night was 3 weeks ago, I continued, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, as I remembered details I had tried to forget. Dad came home late, and he smelled like the stuff that makes him mean, you know, the drink that changes his voice and makes his eyes look different. Mom was in the kitchen making his dinner, even though it was almost 10 o'clock, because she knew he would be angry if there wasn't food waiting for him. I could see Mom crying again, but this time her tears looked different, not scared tears, but grateful ones, like she was finally being seen and heard after being invisible for so long. The judge had completely abandoned any pretense of professional distance and was listening to my words with the intensity of someone who understood that what I was sharing would change the outcome of everything happening in this room. He started yelling at her about the dishes in the sink, about how the house wasn't clean enough, about how she was a terrible wife and mother. I said, each word carrying the weight of memory and pain. But then he saw that I had left my backpack on the kitchen table, and he got even angrier. He said Mom couldn't even teach her own daughter to clean up after herself. Dad's lawyer was objecting now, saying something about hearsay and unreliable testimony from a minor, but the judge held up his hand for silence. I realized that my words had power in this room, more power than I had ever imagined possible. For the first time in my life, adults were listening to me not because I was cute or well-behaved, but because what I had to say mattered. That's when he grabbed my backpack and threw it at her, I said, my voice getting stronger with each revelation, and that's when everything changed forever. The backpack hit Mom in the face, and she fell down, and that's when I ran into the kitchen, I said, my voice carrying across the silent courtroom. I stood between them and told Dad to stop hurting my mom. I was still in my pajamas, the ones with the unicorns on them, and I felt so small standing there, but I couldn't just watch anymore. I remembered that moment with perfect clarity. The way the kitchen tiles felt cold under my bare feet, the way Dad seemed to tower over me like a giant, the way Mom looked up at me from the floor with blood on her lip and fear in her eyes. I had never been so scared in my life, but I had also never been so sure that I was doing the right thing. Dad looked at me with eyes I had never seen before, I said, my small hands trembling as I gripped the witness stand. Not angry eyes or disappointed eyes, but cold eyes, like I wasn't his daughter anymore, but just another problem he needed to solve. And then he said something that made me understand just how dangerous our situation had become. The courtroom was completely silent, except for the sound of Mom's quiet crying and the scratch of the court reporter's machine capturing every word. I could feel the weight of everyone's attention, but instead of making me nervous, it made me feel powerful in a way I had never experienced before. He said, "If you ever tell anyone about what happens in this house, you'll never see your mother again. Do you understand me, Sarah? Never. I'll make sure she disappears. And everyone will think she just ran away because she was crazy and couldn't handle being a mother anymore." The words felt heavy coming out of my mouth, like stones I had been carrying in my stomach for weeks. Dad was staring at me with pure hatred now. And I realized that by speaking these words out loud, I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But I also realized something else. I wasn't scared of him anymore. Standing in this courtroom, with the judge listening to my words and Mom crying proud tears instead of scared ones, I felt braver than I had ever imagined possible. But that night, after he went to bed, Mom came to my room. I continued, my voice getting steadier with each sentence. She sat on my bed and told me something I'll never forget. She said that sometimes being brave doesn't mean not being scared, it means doing the right thing even when you're terrified. And she said that we couldn't keep living like this, that we deserved better. I looked over at Mom, and she was nodding, tears streaming down her face, but her back straight and her chin lifted. She looked proud of me, proud of both of us, for finally finding the courage to tell our story to people who had the power to help us. She said that together we were strong enough to tell the truth. I continued, my voice growing louder and more confident, and she was right. We made a plan together, like a team, instead of two scared people trying to survive separately. We collected evidence, we practiced what we would say, and we learned that we didn't have to face Dad's anger alone anymore. The women's shelter was nothing like I had imagined it would be. In my 8-year-old mind, I had pictured something cold and institutional, like a hospital or a school, full of strangers who would look at us with pity or judgment. Instead, the building we pulled up to looked like a regular house, with flower boxes in the windows and a cheerful yellow door that reminded me of sunshine. Mom had called ahead while we sat in the courthouse parking lot, speaking in hushed tones to someone named Patricia, who assured her that they had space for us and that we would be safe there while we figured out our next steps. The woman who greeted us at the door had kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and when she smiled at me, it wasn't the careful, pitying smile I had been expecting. "You must be Sarah," she said, crouching down to my level, in a way that felt respectful rather than condescending. "I'm Patricia, and I want you to know that you are incredibly brave for doing what you did today. Your mom told me a little bit about your testimony, and I am so proud of you for speaking up." Her words made something warm bloom in my chest, a feeling I realized was pride mixed with relief. The room they showed us to was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds covered in colorful quilts and a window that looked out onto a garden where other children were playing. "This will be your space for as long as you need it," Patricia explained, setting down the single suitcase Mom had hastily packed that morning. "We have rules here to keep everyone safe, but they're simple rules. No contact with anyone who might hurt you, participation in the community meals and meetings, and respect for the other families who are staying here." As she spoke, I watched Mom's shoulders gradually relax, the tension she had carried for so many years slowly beginning to ease. But even in this place of safety, surrounded by people who understood our situation and wanted to help us, I couldn't shake the feeling that Dad's anger was still out there somewhere, waiting and growing stronger. That night, as I lay in my narrow bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other families settling in for sleep, I realized that leaving the courthouse had been just the first step in a much longer journey. We had won a battle that day, but the war for our freedom and safety was far from over. And what lay ahead would test everything we had learned about courage, trust, and the complicated business of building a new life from the ashes of an old one. The first few days at the shelter passed in a blur of meetings with social workers, conversations with lawyers, and the strange routine of learning to live in a space that was both safe and temporary. Mom spent hours on the phone, her voice taking on a business-like tone I had never heard before, as she discussed things like restraining order violations, custody arrangements, and something called relocation assistance. Watching her navigate these conversations with growing confidence, I began to see a version of my mother I had never known existed, not just the scared woman who jumped at loud noises and hid bruises with makeup, but a fierce protector who was willing to fight for our future. The other children at the shelter were a mix of ages and stories, but they all had something in common: a particular way of watching adults, of reading faces and body language for signs of danger or safety. I recognized it because I had been doing the same thing for years, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the only child who understood what it meant to be afraid in your own home. There was Marcus, who was 12 and barely spoke but drew incredible pictures of superheroes saving people from burning buildings. There was little Amy, who was only 5 but already knew how to disappear into corners when voices got raised. And there was Jessica, who was my age and whose story was so similar to mine that talking to her felt like looking in a mirror. "Does it ever stop?" Jessica asked me one afternoon, as we sat in the children's playroom, both of us half-heartedly, working on a puzzle that depicted a happy family having a picnic. "The feeling like he's going to show up and take you away." Her question hit me like a punch to the stomach because it perfectly captured the anxiety that had been gnawing at me since we left the courthouse. Even here, surrounded by locked doors and security cameras, and adults whose job it was to keep us safe, I still found myself listening for Dad's voice in every unfamiliar sound, watching for his face in every shadow. "I don't know," I answered, honestly, because I had learned that lies, even kind ones, didn't help anyone in the long run. But I think maybe it gets easier when you realize that the scared feeling doesn't have to control what you do anymore. Like, I'm still scared of him, but I'm not letting that fear stop me from telling people the truth or asking for help. As I spoke these words, I realized I was beginning to understand something important about courage. It wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of fear, to choose hope and truth and love even when they felt dangerous. 3 weeks into our stay at the shelter, something happened that changed everything I thought I understood about justice, safety, and the power of speaking up. I was in the common area working on homework when Patricia appeared in the doorway, her usually calm expression replaced by something that looked like controlled urgency. "Sarah, honey, can you and your mom come to my office for a minute?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral in the way adults use when they're trying not to scare children but need to discuss something serious. Mom was already there when I arrived, sitting in one of the comfortable chairs that made Patricia's office feel more like a living room than a place where difficult conversations happened. But the tension in Mom's shoulders and the way her hands were clasped tightly in her lap told me that whatever Patricia needed to discuss wasn't good news. "The police called about 20 minutes ago," Patricia began, her eyes moving between Mom and me as she chose her words carefully. "Your father has been arrested for violating the restraining order. He was found parked outside Sarah's school this afternoon, and several teachers reported seeing him watching the playground during recess." The words hit me like ice water, flooding my system with a terror so complete that for a moment I couldn't breathe. Dad had been watching my school. He had been sitting in his car, probably planning something, waiting for a chance to get to me when I was alone and vulnerable. The thought made my skin crawl and my stomach lurch, but underneath the fear was something else, a burning anger that he had tried to use my safety as a weapon against Mom, that he had been willing to put me in danger just to maintain his control over our lives. "Is he in jail now?" Mom asked, her voice steady but tight with controlled emotion. I could see her fighting to stay calm for my sake, to be the strong protector I needed her to be, even though she was probably just as scared as I was. Patricia nodded, consulting the notes she had written during her phone conversation with the police. "Yes, and because this is a violation of a court order, he won't be eligible for bail until at least Monday. That gives us some time to discuss your options and make sure you both feel safe and supported." But as Patricia continued talking about increased security measures and possible relocation assistance, I found myself thinking about something else entirely. Dad's arrest wasn't just a victory for our safety, it was proof that the system we had trusted with our story was actually working. that the adults who had listened to my testimony in that courtroom had meant what they said about protecting us. For the first time since leaving the courthouse, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, we really could build a life where Dad's anger couldn't reach us. The judge was nodding now, and I could see understanding and decision forming in his eyes. The lawyers were shuffling papers and whispering to each other. But I could tell that the most important part of this hearing was already over. My testimony had done what Mum and I had hoped it would do. It had shown everyone in this room exactly who Dad really was behind his perfect mask. We also made a safety plan, I continued, feeling like I was telling the story of two different people, a scared little girl and her frightened mother who had somehow found the courage to become warriors. If Dad got really angry and we thought he might hurt one of us badly, Mom would grab me and we would run to Mrs. Henderson's house next door. She gave me a key and taught me her phone number, and we practiced what we would say if we had to call the police again. I could see several people in the courtroom wiping their eyes, and I realized that my story was affecting them in ways I hadn't expected. These weren't just words I was speaking, they were pieces of my life, moments of terror and courage that had shaped who I was becoming, and by sharing them, I was helping other people understand something important about families and secrets, and the power of speaking up when someone you love is in danger. But the most important thing Mom taught me was that none of this was our fault, I said, my voice carrying across the silent courtroom. She said that some people have sickness in their hearts that makes them hurt the people they're supposed to love, and that Dad's sickness wasn't something we caused or something we could fix. The only thing we could do was protect ourselves and tell the truth when someone was finally ready to listen. And now, looking at the judge's face, I knew that someone was finally ready to listen. His expression had changed from professional interest to genuine concern, and I could see that he understood the weight of the decision he was about to make. This wasn't just about custody or restraining orders. This was about whether a little girl and her mother would be safe or continue to live in fear. That's why we're here today, I concluded, my voice strong and clear. Because we're ready to tell the truth, and we're ready to be safe. Asterisk. So when you ask me if my mom did anything wrong, the answer is no, I said, my 80-year-old voice carrying the weight of months of fear, planning, and finally, hope. The only thing she did wrong was stay quiet for too long, and she did that because she was trying to protect me. But we learned that sometimes protecting someone means being brave enough to ask for help, even when you're scared of what might happen next. I looked around the courtroom one more time, taking in all the faces that had listened to my story. Some looked sad, some looked angry, and some looked like they understood something about families and secrets that they hadn't understood before. But all of them looked like they believed me, and that was more than I had dared to hope for. When I first stood up and said I wanted to speak, my mom is the bravest person I know, I concluded, my voice strong and clear. She taught me that love isn't supposed to hurt, that families are supposed to feel safe, and that children should never have to take pictures of their mother's bruises to prove that someone is being hurt. She taught me that speaking the truth, even when it's scary, is always better than staying quiet when someone you love is in danger. The judge was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Thank you, Sarah. You are a very brave little girl, and your testimony today has helped me understand exactly what kind of decision I need to make. He looked at Dad, then at Mom, then back at me. Based on what I've heard here today, I'm granting the restraining order and awarding temporary custody to your mother. Your father will not be allowed to contact either of you until he completes anger management and substance abuse programs. As the words sank in, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. Mom was crying happy tears now, and for the first time since we walked into that courthouse, I knew that we were going to be okay. We had told our truth, someone had listened. And now we could start building a life where love didn't come with bruises and fear. Sometimes the smallest voices can change everything, and that day, mine helped save us both. But what happened immediately after the judge's decision was something I hadn't prepared for, something that would test everything I thought I knew about courage and consequences. As the gavel came down with a sound that seemed to echo through my entire body, Dad's face transformed into something I had never seen before, not just anger, but a kind of rage that made the air in the courtroom feel electric and dangerous. His lawyer was frantically shuffling papers and whispering urgent words in his ear, but Dad wasn't listening anymore. His eyes were locked on mine, and in them I could see a promise of revenge that made my stomach twist into knots. This isn't over, he said, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversations that had started up around us. The words weren't loud, but they carried across the courtroom like a threat wrapped in velvet, and I watched as several people turned to stare at him with shocked expressions. The bailiff immediately stepped forward, positioning himself between Dad and our section of the courtroom, his hand resting casually on his belt in a way that looked friendly but felt protective. Mom reached for my hand as we stood to leave, her fingers still trembling but her grip strong and sure. "We did it," she whispered in my ear, her voice thick with tears and relief and something else, pride. "You were so brave, Sarah, so incredibly brave." But even as she spoke these words of celebration, I could see her eyes darting nervously toward Dad, watching his every movement with the hypervigilance of someone who had learned to read danger in the smallest gestures. That the walk out of that courtroom felt like the longest journey of my life. Each step took us further from the place where I had found my voice and told our truth. But it also took us closer to a world where we would have to figure out how to live with the consequences of that truth. As we passed through the heavy wooden doors and into the hallway beyond, I realized that while the judge's decision had given us legal protection, the real work of rebuilding our lives was just beginning, and what waited for us in the weeks that followed would test every ounce of strength we had discovered in that courtroom, pushing us to our limits and forcing us to become people we never imagined we could be. The courthouse steps felt different on the way out than they had on the way in. That morning, they had seemed like a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb, each stone step representing another moment closer to a terrifying unknown. Now, as we descended them together, Mom's hand firmly clasped in mine, they felt like a bridge connecting our old life to something new and uncertain, but undeniably ours. The October air was crisp against my face, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. And for the first time in months, I took a deep breath that didn't hurt my chest. But the relief I felt was complicated by a gnawing anxiety that had started growing in my stomach the moment Dad had made his threat. I knew him well enough to understand that his anger didn't just disappear because a judge had told him to stay away from us. If anything, the public humiliation of losing in court, of having his carefully constructed image shattered by his 8-year-old daughter's testimony, would only make that anger burn hotter and more dangerous. As we walked toward Mom's car, the little blue sedan that had always felt too small when Dad was in it but now seemed like a safe haven, I found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him following us. "Where will we go now?" I asked Mom as she fumbled with her keys, her hands still shaking from the adrenaline and emotion of the past few hours. It was a question that had been haunting me ever since we had made the decision to speak up. The practical reality of what came after the courtroom drama and legal victories. Our house, the place that had been both home and prison for so many years, was legally Dad's property, and the restraining order meant he couldn't come near us. But it also meant we couldn't go back there either. Mom paused with her hand on the car door handle, and when she looked at me, her eyes were bright with tears but also with something I hadn't seen there in a long time. "Hope." "I don't know yet, sweetheart," she said honestly, a quality I had learned to treasure after so many years of careful lies and protective half-truths. "But I know we'll figure it out together. We have each other, we have the law on our side now, and we have people who want to help us. That's more than we've had in a very long time." As she spoke these words, I realized that for the first time in my life, uncertainty didn't feel like the enemy. It felt like possibility.